Alrighty. Hey, also, this is just again for Lab 5 if you missed it. So I'll just be going over all of the lab activities. Depending on time, I might also go over the Pokemon activity. Granted, it's a little on the long side. Okay, so first activity is Lab 1. So, it's just writing a program that displays welcome to Java 5 times using a for loop. So, alrighty, so what I'm going to do here first, just to make life easy, is, whatever. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is just make a string that's going to hold welcome to Java. Just really to just make my life easier. You don't have to do this, but so make my for loop. I'm going to declare I, and it's going to start at 0. I'm going to have I, and I want this to run while I is less than 10. And so what this will effectively do, it'll start at 0, and it'll run until I is not less than 10 anymore, so when it equals 10. If I wanted to, I could also make it, I can make it equal while I is less than or equal to, or while I is greater, but I just want this to run 10 times. And then I'm going to have I increment every single time this for loop executes. So now I'm just going to type in my string welcome and run it. So ran 10 times. So I think the lab wanted 5 times though. Okay, so 5 times, right? So I'm also just going to print this out for illustration. I'm just going to print out the value that I is holding, right? That's my value I'm using to increment. And we're just going to look at how many times it runs, right? We start at 0, and we go all the way to 4. First run, second run, third run, fourth run, fifth run. So now we want to get the user to input. We want the user to actually input how many times they want the loop to run. So I got import scanner. And we're going to need it to be an integer. So we're going to use input.nextInt. Okay. So now the question is, right, what variable do we need to swap around to actually make this work in the way we want it, right? So how do I make it run the amount of times the user wants? So the user how many times the user wants it to run is going to be held in the variable runs. And so 5 is what was controlling how many times my loop ran, right? So I'm going to replace it with runs, right? So now we're also going to go back to we're going to print out our welcome to Java message again. So now we're going to run it. And how many times should the loop run? Let's say 20 times. So runs 20 times. Let's say we want it to run 3 times now. And we'll run 3. Right. Any questions so far? I'm not sure if anybody's actually on the stream quite yet, but that's fine. Alrighty. So, yeah, if anybody has a question at any point, just let me know in chat. Okay, so now, using a while loop. write a program to allow a user to keep entering new strings until they enter exit. Use loop to do this every time the user enters a new string with the exception of the string final, exit without exit, concatenate it to the end, right? And so basically what this is asking us to do is just write an infinite loop that will only exit when until the user says to exit it, right? So there's a couple different ways we can do this. So we still have our scanner, of course. And so I'll start with my while, right? And I'm gonna have to give conditions for the loop, right? And so I'll go over two ways that we could really make this work. The first one is we're gonna declare a Boolean variable. I tend to call my Boolean variables, if they're just meant for basically making a loop or a conditional execute, I usually just call them flag. Just because for me, I know exactly what that means. And I'll give a comment that just says, hey, flag is going to be this for anybody who's looking at that program at a later date, so they can understand what I mean when I reference flag. The important part is that you are consistent with it. So we're going to initialize it to true because we want it to run the first time. So we can have while flag, right? So it's going to be checking the value flag and if it's true or not. So at which point we need to get the user's input, right? First we need to have a string though. Big string. I'm just going to initialize it to being nothing. Right. So what we can do is we got to get the user's input each time, right? So big string is equal to, well, what is going to be big string going to be equal to? So one of the parts about this, right, is we're getting input. We have our string input by the user, and then that should be added to what they've already input. So the way we would do that is setting it equal to itself, and then also adding the input from this round, right? So we'll call this added, right? So the issue we're going to run into, right, is we need to actually make certain we have that declared because I'm a genius. And the input there we'll just do input next line, right? So as of right now, we have this loop, but it's going to loop infinitely. And that's one of the issues we're running into, right? There's no exit condition, right? We're never changing flag to false to tell it that we need to stop. So what we can do is after we take the input, but before we actually add it to the string, we can have an if statement, right? And so what we can have is if added dot equals the string exit, right? And what do we want it to do if that happens? We want flag to be set to false, so that way the loop stops executing, right? So the sneaky trick here is that if we didn't modify the code anymore at this point, the issue we'll run into is that flag will be set to false, but exit still gets added to our string. So one thing we can do is if we add an else after that, that'll prevent the string being added if this has been evaluated to true, right? So this is one way we can do this problem. So I'm also going to add just an input prompt. Okay, so input please. Let's just say 1, 2. Oh, I should probably also actually output what is. So we're also going to output what the big string holds at this point. So input 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? So we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now what we're going to do is we're going to exit. Right? So what's important to note here is it's just as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's no exit stuck on the bottom, and that's because we stuck this in an else, basically meaning if this is equal to exit, don't do this part. So there's another option, right? And this is sometimes better, sometimes worse. It just depends on how you want to use it. It's really up to you. You do need to be careful with these though, because if you mess them up, it is much easier to get yourself stuck in an infinite loop. So what we can do is we can just have a while true loop, right? That'll basically just loop infinitely with no way to get out of it, right? At least in terms of we're not getting out of it by this evaluating to false. It'll always be true. The trick is what we can do is we can use a break statement. So what a break will do is it'll literally break out of the loop it's currently in. So if I'm in this loop, if it hits this break statement, it'll continue executing the code at this point, right? So let's see what happens. Let's type exit, and we break. Right. Both of these have important, and what's important about this break here is it jumps from line 17 immediately to line 24. It doesn't even check this code. Watch, I can put a system.out here, and it'll literally give me an error, unreachable code, right? Because if I ever execute this if statement, this break happens, and this never happens. Okay. Activity 3. Sometimes you use validate input. You guys can read. I'm not gonna read this out loud to you. Okay, so this next one is figuring out how to get the user to input a value that fits the parameters that we want, right? And so what we end up doing, right, is we need our loop to execute as long and just continually execute until the point at which we reach our exit condition. And so the question is, what is our exit condition? So our exit condition is when the number is positive, and also when the number is not divisible by 10. I think is it not divisible by 10? Yeah. So first I'm just going to declare some stuff. Okay. So the first time we're going to have this run, right? So we can either use a do while or we can just use a while loop. I generally just use a while. I usually don't use do while loops. I don't particularly like them, but you can do what you want with that. So I'm just gonna ask the user to put in a number. At which point we're gonna have an integer. So we're getting an integer. So we're just gonna call it. We're just gonna call it user. And we're gonna get input.nextInt. All right. And so we do this first part. Actually, I think we will use do while here. I think it's the most efficient way to do this. Ugh, I haven't used do whiles in so long. Okay, so we've gotten the user's input, right? And so now what we need to do is we need to actually check we need to actually check if the user's input matches our parameters. And so the way we're going to do that is using a variety of different methods, right? So we want this to loop while the user's number is less than 0, or the user's number is divisible by 10, or user mod 10 is equal to 0, right? If either of these conditions are true, the user needs to input their stuff again, right? Wise choice, user, right? And so if either of our conditions are not met, it'll basically just have them keep on trying to input stuff. So let's try -1. Didn't work. Okay, let's try 10. Didn't work, right? Because 10 is divisible by 10, obviously. What happens if we do 5? Wise choice, right? Any questions so far? Okay. Good job. Alrighty, talking robot. Okay, so this last one is we're going to need to come up with some pre-generated statements for our little chatbot. So I'm just going to do that real quick. Couple of strings. One. Right, so I've got 5 pre-generated strings. So let's have our loop while the user has not said to leave, right? And we're going to have the keyword be by. So in this case, we're going to have just a while loop. And what our condition is going to be, first we need to come up with a string. So we're just going to call it past this time is equal to while past dot equals by, right? And so the issue right now is that this will run only if the variable past is equal to by. And so what we're going to do is we're going to use the inverter modifier to basically say while not. Okay, so any questions so far? Nope. All right. So now that we're in our while loop, right, we need to get the user's input. So we're going to store it. So we're going to say please press enter something by to leave. So, and we're gonna just use a standard pass dot we're gonna set past equal to input next line. Because we don't actually really care what the user is doing in this case, but we still want to get their input. So now we need to generate a random number. In this case, I'm going to declare my integer inside of the while loop. It just means that basically I can't reference it outside of the while loop, which is fine. I don't need to anyways. So I'm just going to call it rand is equal to math.random. And if I want 5 options, multiply by 5. Right. I'm going to have to import math. Okay. Really? Okay. So now that I've generated my random number, I'm just going to need an some if statements, right? I'm trying to think if there's a... Sadly, there's not a super easy way to do this other than just typing it out. So if rand is equal to 0, we're going to print option 1. And so the nice part here is that I can just use an else for the final one. I don't have to write it out because the only other option would be for it to be 4. Let's print that. And so what I'm also going to do here is actually, no, because we would actually still want to use an else if because there's the possibility the user enters by, in which case we don't want the bot to respond whatsoever. And actually, one second, let me think about how I... So I think we're going to use... So we can do that real quick. So we can put an if So I'm adding this, right, to check if the user wants to exit and they don't really want the bot to reply. So in that case, I don't really care about anything happening. If I wanted to, I could break out now, but we're just going to say for the sake of argument that I don't want to do that. I just want to make certain that this only happens if the user doesn't want to exit. And so let me use that. So this should work now. Let's find out. Please enter. Bye to leave. Okay. Hi. I'm gonna go now, right? It doesn't necessarily matter what we're putting in. What's important is that it's generating random things, right? So if we look, there's our chatbot, right? If we want to, we could add more strings. If you want to be really ambitious, you can check specifically what the user's asking. And if they ask something, you can say, if they, what's the date, you can get the date, stuff like that. But that's about as far as this one goes. Yep. All right, and so let's just double check that if we say buy, it actually exits for us, right? So we hit buy. Did not work. So that's a weird little bug. Why do we have that? So input. One sec. I think it may have just been because I spammed it. Yeah, okay, it was just because I literally hit so many keys that I got all confused. Yeah, the scanner is not ideal in terms of input gathering at a layer. Eventually, if you guys get to some higher level courses, you pretty much will never use scanner because it's got some weird quirks that are not ideal. Okay, let's just look at this challenge activity. Okay. So I think I'm gonna call it for tonight, guys. If anybody would like me to do the challenge activity, I'm more than happy to do it. Just shoot me an email and I will upload a video on that as well. But for now, that's it. If anybody had any questions, shoot me an email. Yep. Thanks for watching, guys.